Hey guys, I'm Redeemed Zoomer. So today I'm going to show you guys this family tree of the Apostolic Churches, which are basically the churches that are not Protestant or evangelical. We're talking about the Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches and some of the other ancient apostolic churches. All these churches have roots in the early church, and all of them claim to be the unique successors of the apostles. All of them claim we are the one true church founded by Jesus and the apostles, and outside of us there's no salvation. So that's why they're called apostolic churches, because they claim to be the successors of the apostles. Now, a lot of times when people think about apostolic Christianity, they think it's just Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but it's a bit more complicated than that because there have been a lot of splits over the years. So let's talk about that. And here's how this chart works. Even though there's a lot of dots here, not all of these dots are completely independent from each other. So when there's like an arrow, and there's a black arrow between two churches, it means they're in communion with each other. So a Syriac Orthodox Church isn't going to say the Coptic Orthodox churches are outside of the church, but they would say that the Roman Catholics or the Russian Orthodox are outside of the church. So all these four churches, the Syriac Orthodox, the Coptic Orthodox, the Armenian Orthodox, and the Ethiopian Orthodox, all of them have arrows connecting each other because they're all called Oriental Orthodox. And Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox and some other Orthodox churches I didn't include because I don't have space on the graph, but you get the idea, like Romanian Orthodox, Bulgarian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, they're all in communion with each other, so they are called Eastern Orthodox. But these Orthodox churches and these Orthodox churches and these Orthodox churches are not in communion with each other. So how did this happen? So apostolic Christianity comes from the idea of ecumenical councils. All these churches really ground their authority in ecumenical councils. The first ecumenical council was the Council of Nicaea, and that happened in the 300s. It happened in the 4th century. Before that, there wasn't any ecumenical council over the entire church. There were local councils telling churches what to do. There were bishops, there were presbyters, there were controversies, but the first ecumenical council happened when the Roman Empire became Christian, and Constantine, Emperor Constantine, gathered all the church leaders in the empire at Nicaea to basically hammer out the issues and deal with the Arian controversy, which was happening at the time. Now, luckily, the Arian churches have died out, which is good because Arianism was a heresy. The Arian church has died out thanks to Athanasius. The Arians were these Christians who said that Jesus isn't really God. He's like God, but he was created by God. The Arians taught that God created Jesus, that God the Father created the Son, and Athanasius was like, no, the Son is also God. The Father is God, Jesus is God, the Holy Spirit is God. And Arianism has since died out, but it was a really big problem during Athanasius' time. For a while, the Arians almost took over the church, and Athanasius was exiled 5 times. And they were like, Athanasius, the world is against you. And he was like, well, I'm against the world. So that's why Athanasius is called Athanasius against the world. But he defended the Council of Nicaea, and eventually the Council of Nicaea won out. So after that, people were like, hey, this ecumenical council stuff is really working out. Let's keep doing this. Let's do more ecumenical councils. And that's when Christianity began to split. So the second council, which I didn't include here because it didn't really split the church, was the Council of Constantinople. The Council of Nicaea clarified that the Son is God, just like the Father, but some people were saying, okay, yeah, the Father's God, the Son's God, but maybe not the Holy Spirit. So then the Council of Constantinople said, actually, yes, the Holy Spirit is God. The reason I didn't include it in this family tree is because there's not like an existing church today that accepts the Council of Nicaea, but not the Council of Constantinople. And the Council of Constantinople changed the Nicene Creed. It updated the Nicene Creed to include a part about the Holy Spirit. So then there was the Council of Ephesus. This is the third ecumenical council, and this is when the first split happened. So there was this patriarch named Nestorius. He was the patriarch of Constantinople. And he was saying that Mary isn't really the mother of God. She's just the mother of Christ, because he was sort of splitting the humanity and the divinity of Christ. He was like, obviously Mary's not the mother of God, because God's always existed and Mary didn't always exist, but she's the mother of Jesus's human nature, because Jesus's human nature started existing in the incarnation. So he said Mary is the mother of Christ, but not the mother of God. But then St. Cyril of Alexandria was like, dude, that's heresy. He was like, bro, that's heresy. Because he said the whole point of Christianity is God coming down, becoming human, and dying for us. So he said that Nestorius was really denying the incarnation when he said that it's more proper to refer to the Holy Virgin as Mother of Christ than Mother of God. So the Council of Ephesus sided with Cyril of Alexandria, and then Nestorius and his followers were kicked out, and they still exist today as the Assyrian Church of the East. Here's the thing. Modern ecumenical dialogue has revealed that Nestorius wasn't as Nestorian as people thought. Towards the end of his life, he was okay with accepting the words Mother of God, and most Assyrian Church of the East leaders today are willing to accept the Chalcedonian definition, which is something that the church agreed upon later. And right now, the Roman Catholic Church is engaging in ecumenical dialogues with the Assyrian Church, and they might come into communion eventually. But for like 1,600 years, all the other Christians condemned the Assyrian Church as heretical. If you talk to Assyrian Church of the East people, they'll say it was mostly influenced by politics, because the Assyrians weren't really in the Roman Empire, and the ecumenical councils were kind of a function of the Roman Empire. So if you talk to them, they'll say they were just misunderstood due to politics. But regardless, Nestorius and his followers left because they were kicked out, and the Assyrian Church of the East still exists today. It's got a really fascinating history. Briefly, the Assyrian Christians, like the Nestorian Christians, actually converted China to Christianity in like the 600s. This was way before any like European missionaries arrived. And there was also a split in the Assyrian Church of the East. So right now there's the Assyrian Church of the East and the Ancient Church of the East, but they're both part of this Assyrian Nestorian tradition. But the literal Nestorian Church is less Nestorian than a lot of evangelicals. Because a lot of evangelicals will say Mary is not the Mother of God, whereas Nestorius was like, maybe it's more proper to call her Mother of Christ than Mother of God. So Nestorius was a moderate Nestorian compared to a lot of evangelicals today. Alright, so Cyril of Alexandria was the hero of the Council of Ephesus. But then some of Cyril of Alexandria's followers, including Saint Dioscorus, were saying that Jesus has one nature. Cyril of Alexandria was like, you can't separate the natures of Christ. So Dioscorus was like, yeah, you can't separate them because Jesus has one nature. There is one incarnate nature of the Word. That's terminology from Cyril of Alexandria. But people were debating whether Cyril meant what Dioscorus really thought he meant. So the Council of Chalcedon was a debate about whether Jesus has one nature or two natures. Dioscorus thought he was following Cyril of Alexandria and saying that Jesus has one nature. So that's why they're called monophysites, monophysites, or miaphysites. They prefer the term miaphysite. Now, when they said Jesus had only one nature, they didn't mean he was some sort of demigod. They didn't mean that he was a mix of human and divine. They still believed Jesus is fully human and fully divine, but the Council of Chalcedon thought that the language of one nature made it really hard to convey that. So Pope Leo was kind of the hero of the Council of Chalcedon, and the Council of Chalcedon said that Jesus has two natures, and then the Oriental Orthodox churches, including the Coptics, it was mainly the Coptics at this point, they all got kicked out, and they followed the theology of Dioscorus. And to this day, there's still a lot of Oriental Orthodox Christians who still believe Jesus has one nature, but the leaders of both the Oriental Orthodox churches and the Eastern Orthodox churches are starting to rethink the condemnation, because the Council of Chalcedon was very clear, like, these guys are heretics, and that means they're not saved and they're going to hell. But what the Oriental Orthodox were saying was Jesus has one nature that's truly human and truly divine, and what Chalcedon was saying is Jesus has a truly human nature and a truly divine nature. So they both agreed that Jesus is truly human and truly divine, but they didn't agree on whether to express that using the language of one nature or two natures. So yeah, Pope Leo I, he was really the main theologian of the Council of Chalcedon. Leo's tome is kind of like the textbook for Chalcedonian Christology. And then there were a few more councils later, but they didn't cause splits that still last today. Like, there was the whole iconoclast controversy in the Byzantine Church, but there are no Byzantine iconoclasts left alive today. So there weren't any lasting splits up until the Great Schism. Now, the Great Schism had been brewing for hundreds of years. Like, even 200 years before the Great Schism, you see Western theologians and Eastern theologians beginning to talk very, very differently. So in the 800s, you have theologians like Ratramnus and Theodulf of Orleans, and they clearly teach what's called the Filioque. they teach that the Holy Spirit is from the Father and the Son in Latin is filioque, and a lot of the Western Nicene creeds begin using the filioque in the Nicene Creed. So they say, we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son, filioque. In the West, they believe in filioque. But here in the East, they don't really believe in that, and in the 800s, there's this guy, Photius, St. Photius, who strongly condemns the filioque. He thinks it's heresy. So the tensions had been brewing for like 500 years leading up to the Great Schism. Even like St. Augustine, who lived over 500 years before the Great Schism, like he was teaching the filioque, and ever since him, a lot of the Western Church was teaching the filioque. But it really came to a head in the Great Schism. There were a lot of political things because the West spoke Latin and the East spoke Greek, and theology is always connected to politics. The church split along the same lines that the empire did. The Western Roman Empire mostly became Roman Catholic, and the Eastern Roman Empire mostly became Eastern Orthodox. But it came to a head when the Pope tried to formally add the filioque to the Nicene Creed, and the Eastern churches were like, you can't do that, and the Pope's like, yes, I can, I'm the Pope, and then it split. So then you had the Western Church, which today is the Roman Catholic Church, and the Eastern Church, which is the various Eastern Orthodox churches that are sort of in communion with each other. Now, to be clear, both the Catholic and the Orthodox churches both claim to be the Orthodox Catholic Church. So the Orthodox churches will still claim to be Catholic, and the Catholic churches will still claim to be Orthodox. It's mostly just historical happenstance that people get stuck with the labels that they do. So the Eastern Orthodox Church hasn't had any ecumenical councils since the Great Schism. They've had pan-Orthodox councils, like the Synod of Jerusalem, which produced the Confession of Dositheus. That was actually in response to an Eastern Orthodox patriarch who adopted Calvinist theology. His name was St. Cyril Lucaris. So in response to that, the Orthodox Church held the Synod of Jerusalem, which produced a sort of anti-Calvinist confession, the Confession of Dositheus. And that's a pretty good summary of more modern Eastern Orthodox theology. But the Catholic Church continued to have ecumenical councils. There was the Lateran councils, and there was the Council of Florence, where they almost united with the Eastern Orthodox, but then didn't. And the Council of Florence very clearly says you need to believe in the filioque to be saved. If you do not believe in the filioque, you are not saved. So historically, these churches have all basically damned each other. Thanks to the modern ecumenical movement, which was actually started by Protestants, the churches are beginning to relax their anathemas. They're beginning to relax their condemnations of each other. But historically, it was like, you believe what we believe about these issues, or you're going to hell. It was basically like that. So there were a lot of councils. I didn't include all of them because they didn't lead to lasting schisms. Then there was the Council of Trent, which is when the Protestants were kicked out of the Catholic Church. But this is not a family tree that includes Protestants, so I also omitted that. There wasn't any other schisms until Vatican I. So we hear a lot about Vatican II. Vatican I was in the 1800s. And that was when they officially declared the infallibility of the Pope. Now, this does not mean the Pope is always infallible. It does not mean everything the Pope says is infallible. It means the Pope has the ability to make infallible statements when he's speaking ex cathedra or in the chair of Peter. And according to most Catholics, this has only happened like once or twice. But there was a lot of debate about this leading up to it. Like before Vatican I, a lot of Catholics were saying, no, the Pope is never infallible. The Pope cannot make infallible decrees. So after Vatican I, the Catholics who had been against that, a lot of them split off and formed the Old Catholic Church. So this is a pretty small church, and a lot of people don't know what it exists. Like on my Discord server, I do have a role for Old Catholic, but a lot of people accept that role without knowing what it is. They're like, I'm Catholic, and I guess I'm kind of old. I'm like 32. I'll choose the Old Catholic role. No, the Old Catholic Church is a specific church, but in practice, it's a lot more Anglican than Roman Catholic. Because, you know, my friend Calvin Robinson, who I've done an episode with once, he pretty easily switched from like an Anglo-Catholic church to an Old Catholic church. There's actually two Old Catholic denominations. One of them is more liberal and mainline. One of them is more conservative. But yeah, so that was Vatican I. And then Vatican II was just like less than 100 years later, I think. Vatican II was in the 1900s. And Vatican II was really like the modern Catholic Council. Vatican II gave us modern Catholicism. Vatican II greatly relaxed the attitude of the church towards other churches. Vatican II was the first council to really say Christians who are not Roman Catholic can be saved. Vatican II calls Protestants departed brethren, and it even says that the plan of salvation includes Muslims. Now, there's a lot of debate about what the church means by that. You'll find Catholics like Bishop Robert Barron, who says that, yeah, even atheists of goodwill can be saved. Barron said those exact words. And I know some of my more traditional Catholic friends are like, no, Vatican II does not mean that you can be saved outside the Catholic Church. It just means that maybe by some invincible ignorance you can be united to the Catholic Church subconsciously, maybe under these very extraordinary circumstances. So there's all sorts of different interpretations of Vatican II. But a lot of Catholics felt like Vatican II was modernizing the Catholic Church. And there were some Catholics who actually said Vatican II was apostasy. They said that the Catholic Church left the true Catholic faith at Vatican II, so they became the Sedevacantists. Now, actual Sedevacantist churches are very rare. It's not like you can go to First Presbyterian Church of Springfield, and then First Lutheran Church, First Roman Catholic Church, and then First Sedevacantist Church. It's I think there's the Palomarian Church in Spain, and this YouTuber Peter Diamond, who is a Sedevacantist, he has his own little monastery in upstate New York, but generally real-life Sedevacantists are pretty rare. There's also the SSPX, which is kind of a halfway Sedevacantist group within the Roman Catholic Church, but regardless, there's a lot of Catholics who think, I wouldn't say it's a lot, it's nothing compared to mainstream Catholicism. There's a good number of Catholics who think Vatican II modernized the church, and some of them go so far as to even separate from mainstream Catholicism, because the word Sedevacantist has the word vacant in it. They think the chair of the Pope has been vacant ever since Vatican II. They think there hasn't been a true Pope ever since Vatican II, because Vatican II is a departure from the faith. All right. So we're almost done here. Now we're going to talk about the Eastern Orthodox churches. So there were some Eastern Orthodox churches, or I guess there were some Eastern churches, that still wanted to stay in communion with the Pope, despite being fundamentally Eastern, despite being Greek, despite having Greek liturgical traditions and even theological traditions. So those are called Byzantine Catholics. There's actually a good number of Eastern Catholics. So the Byzantine Catholics are a combination of Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox. Theologically and liturgically, well, especially liturgically and sort of theologically, they're more Eastern Orthodox than Roman Catholic. And if you go to a Byzantine Catholic church, it just looks like an Eastern Orthodox church. Matt Whitman of the 10-Minute Bible Hour, he goes to all sorts of denominations churches. When he goes to a Byzantine Catholic church, it's funny. You see all these Orthodox-looking icons on the walls, but then there's an icon of Pope John Paul II, right? So they look and feel Orthodox, but they're in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. And there's sort of an equivalent thing. There's some Western Rite Orthodox churches, but I didn't include them here because they're much less prominent than Byzantine Catholic churches. Most Western Rite Orthodox churches are actually Anglican churches that went into communion with the Eastern Orthodox churches. So yeah, Byzantine Catholics, everyone is asking me when am I going to talk about Byzantine Catholics? Okay, I'm talking about them. Are you happy? I'm talking here. So the Byzantine Catholics are basically Orthodox in aesthetic and liturgy and some of their theology, but Catholic officially. And some people say, oh, it's not just it's not theology, it's just the liturgy. But, Byzantine Catholics will venerate St. Gregory Palamas sometimes. St. Gregory Palamas is a very, very important Eastern Orthodox theologian. He's probably the most important post-schism Eastern Orthodox theologian, and the Roman Catholic councils declare him a heretic because he very clearly denied the Filioque, and the Council of Florence, like I said, says you need to believe in the Filioque to be saved. But Byzantine Catholics will still venerate Palamas because it's part of the Eastern Orthodox tradition. So now we have the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox churches and some other national Orthodox churches I didn't include. They're all in communion with each other. There are some sort of splits due to politics, due to wars and stuff, but they're all basically the same thing, just the way these Oriental Orthodox churches are all basically the same thing. Where there is a split, however, is with the true Orthodox churches. So as you might know, I know you probably have some Eastern Orthodox friends who celebrate Christmas a week later than everyone else. The Orthodox used to use a different calendar than everyone else. They didn't use the same calendar that most Western people do. And in recent times, a lot of the Orthodox churches switched over to the same calendar that Catholics and Protestants use due to the ecumenical movement, which was influenced by Protestants. However, there were a lot of Orthodox Christians who didn't like this. They were like, why are you compromising with heretics? That means you have left the faith if you are compromising with heretics. So there is a group of Orthodox churches called the True Orthodox that are separate from mainstream Russian and Greek Orthodox. Just the other day, I did a conversation with a few true Orthodox priests. So true Orthodoxy is like mainstream Eastern Orthodoxy, but it's a lot more conservative because it has not been influenced by the ecumenical movement. Both mainstream Roman Catholicism and mainstream Eastern Orthodoxy have somewhat been influenced by the ecumenical movement. Catholicism much more so than Eastern Orthodoxy, but true Orthodoxy has not been influenced by the ecumenical movement at all. And here's an example. Historically, all of these churches have said, you know, you're either in our church officially or you're going to hell, no exceptions. But nowadays, Orthodox priests, due to the influence of the Protestant ecumenical movement, will say like, oh, we know where the church is, but we don't know where the church isn't. So maybe your Baptist grandmother is a nice lady and she'll go to heaven. Right? The true Orthodox don't say that. Like, I asked these priests, like, is there any hope of salvation for somebody who's not true Orthodox? And they're just like, nope. I was like, even like a normal, like, mainstream Eastern Orthodox person? And they're like, nope. Yeah, so that's true Orthodox. All right, guys, these are all the main apostolic churches. I think there's a total of like 9 separate ones that are not in communion with each other. So yeah, these are all the different options for people who are looking into apostolic Christianity. Personally, what I'm trying to do this year is I'm trying to spend 1 month diving deep into every major Christian tradition. So in January, which is almost done, I'm studying Orthodoxy. That's why I had that conversation with the true Orthodox priests. In February, I'm going to study the Assyrian Church of the East, the Nestorian Church. In March, I'm going to study the Oriental Orthodox. And then in April, I'm going to study Roman Catholicism. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all later. God bless.